Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast with myself, your overdressed host, Ben Scout, and maybe Jason is underdressed this week. I don't know if.
Yeah, I felt like I was showing when the camera came on. I thought it was at a job interview, but alas,
Yeah, what are your biggest strengths and weaknesses? That has anyone ever?
underdressing.
Yeah, yeah, keeping people at ease without casually I dress. It's look, just a bit of an announcement before we kick off this week. We're going to be moving the podcast day to Monday, usually release on a Tuesday. Going forward, as of next week, we're going to be dropping on a Monday for various logistical reasons. So if you are Garfield and you hate the start of the week, then this will hopefully be a ray of light that will prevent you from descending into clinical
A
depression.
pep in your step.
Exactly. So hopefully we can provide that for you. And so this week we are going to be talking about the fact that the Gardaí have a new objection to citizen journalists filming them. We have a bit about the curriculum and the fact that our school children are being taught about climate related matters, which I think, Jason, you can talk a little bit about in detail, and also the fact that there is going to be no directly elected mayor for Dublin because they're afraid that a Dublinese cage fighter may take the throne against the wishes and desires of the country. So, which of those would you like to kick off with? Which sounds the most appealing to you as a
I think we'll start off with Ben Scallan's Dublin mayoral run. No, it's not. It's not going to be Ben Scallan. It's going to be as reported by the Sunday Times over the weekend. And we should preface this by saying that it is one article that we have a source for this story, and it was anonymously sourced as well. But as John mentioned in his article about it, she's a good reporter, so worth talking about anyway. Which is that the plans for a Dublin mayor have been shelved over Conor McGregor fears that I think as it's kind of been talked about. Someone like him, as it were, could win that position and then ultimately have quite a lot of influence being mayor of the country's far and away biggest city. So yeah, I don't know how far advanced these Dublin mayor plans were. I'm inclined to think not very, given that, I know people have been talking about it on and off for a while, but it only really picked up. I think it picked up again last year in the wake of that Dublin task force report, when they were talking about all these different measures that would be required to make Dublin great again. And yeah, I don't think it had gone anywhere since then. But obviously, since McGregor's presidential run is very likely doomed before it gets going, I think our savvy politicians were looking at that and thinking, "Oh no, you might have a bit of an in there, so let's nip that in the bud ahead of time," according to the report, anyway. So I don't know. It just seems to me the story kind of speaks for itself. The kind of disdain that the political class has for the voting public. It's like, we're going to stop this thing based on who we think you might vote for. It's like, would that not be better off left with the people of Dublin?
Yeah, I mean they've done this before. I remember we probably talked about it on a previous episode. The fact that Simon Coveney, when he was still in office, he effectively blew the whistle, to his credit, on the fact that the government had been floating for a good while the idea of extending the presidential franchise to people in Northern Ireland, allowing them to vote in our presidential elections in the interest of helping to take another step towards unifying the country. And he said that the reason they hadn't done it and they'd been delaying and kicking the can down the road was because they realized it would pretty much guarantee that a Sinn Féin candidate would win every presidential election from now until the end of time, because you get this whole new
Yeah.
SWAT voters who would be clearly inclined that way. And I have no doubt that that's right. A, I'm sure that is the rationale and he's telling the truth there. And B, I'm sure that the fear is correct that Sinn Féin would tend to win presidential elections going forward. Is that a bad thing? I mean, regardless of what you think about Sinn Féin, democracy is democracy is democracy. If you believe that the general public should have the right to self-determination and to pick the people who represent them, then should you worry if people decide Sinn Féin is the best person to represent them as the president, which isn't a foregone conclusion, by the way, but let's say hypothetically it was, or indeed that a Conor McGregor-like figure would become the mayor of Dublin? What kind of anti-democratic instinct is this? We'll talk about our democratic norms, quote unquote, that we love, our precious norms. Is this not a direct smack in the face to the general public and their will that the wrong person might accidentally find their way into a position of power?
Well, I mean, obviously from their perspective, you've got two possible outcomes. Say, for example, I don't for 2 seconds think that even if it did go to a vote and Conor McGregor was one of the candidates, Dublin consistently being one of the most liberal places in the country, there, it seems to me, is no way in hell that he would get into office if he did a popular run in Dublin. But
yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but John was saying on Twitter that actually a more likely outcome than McGregor would be somebody like Aidan O'Riordan being the mayor, which is
which maybe we should be thankful for our political class's anti-democratic spirit deciding to cut that before it gets underway. Because you're right, I think some very very lefty liberal progressive candidate Mayor Hazel Chu is a lot more likely. Although possibly not her, because she doesn't seem to have too successful a run in elections. But I think that there's two outcomes they would foresee. One is that one they possibly foresee and one they don't. One is that, say, just for example, some populist figure won that election, became mayor of Dublin, and then was very successful. That would make, because obviously you imagine the mayor of Dublin would probably have pretty extensive powers, especially if they were in the mold of, say, the mayor of London, who has all sorts of power over there for shaping the direction of the city, which is why people are so critical of, obviously, Sadiq Khan, Boris Johnson, because they obviously see London's continued downward trajectory and attribute that largely to the mayor now instead of the government. Although certainly the government gets some flack there as well. But so say someone like Conor McGregor anyway became mayor of Dublin, and then the city did really well, that would look horrendous for the government. And I don't know, I imagine in the capacity as well, he'd have all sorts of input into government matters, and they wouldn't want any of that. So that's the sort of side of things they foresee. The side of things they don't foresee is if someone like that got into office and then, as is probably far more likely, things continued on their present trajectory, and then they would have a scapegoat there to put everything on the mayor who's nearly ministerial in his power. That would be, I don't know, the Irish government's best possible scapegoat. So I don't know how much they've thought this one through, but it is very much in keeping with, as you described, this anti-democratic spirit at work in Europe. I mean, we saw it in Romania. And then we saw it I know some people say that Marine Le Pen in France was guilty of actual wrongdoing, but then I've heard other people quite convincingly making the point that, she's certainly not the only one doing what she's alleged to have done. So anyway, that's all just to say she can't run for president now ahead of the next presidential elections. So this is certainly in keeping with the trend in Europe at the moment.
Yeah, it really is one of those things where they constantly warn us about the dangers of the far right and authoritarianism rising across Europe and so on and so forth. And it's like that old meme or an old joke of we need to try and ban democracy in the name of protecting democracy. We can't indulge the public the right to decide their own future in case they vote for somebody who's an autocrat, God forbid. It's just it's unbelievable. But but at the same time, it's perfectly believable. I completely believe that this is the kind of thing that Irish politicians would do. It's very much a there's like an acceptable clique of people who they will tolerate and take lip from. They don't mind if, of course, they'd rather their own party won, but Fine Gael will accept a Social Democrats candidate winning. They'll go, "Oh, darn it, we'll get them next time." Or Social Democrats will accept a Green Party candidate winning. They go, that's a shame. We would have liked that, but fair enough. We'll get you next time. There are then people who are outside of the Overton window or outside of the bubble who it is unacceptable for them to get elected. And what I'm about to say, this might not be a good example because he is literally a notorious crime boss. So, it's probably not helping my case.
Who could this be?
Yeah. But we saw the fact that Jerry Hutch, the monk, ran for office in the last general election. He almost got a seat. He just barely fell short. And there was many people who were commenting on this rightly and saying, this is a disturbing trend, which I would agree with. I wouldn't be keen to see somebody like that elected. I wouldn't have voted for him had I been in the constituency. And I agree that there is something worth commenting on there. But then we saw Drew Harris come out of the woodwork to say that, he basically said that this is worrying and we need to see what can be done to prevent things like this in the future, or words to that effect. And I thought, you are the Garda commissioner. It is absolutely none of your business who people of Dublin Central or any other constituency decide to vote for. If somehow Jeffrey Dahmer got on the ballot and people wanted to vote for him for some bizarre reason, I mean, I can comment on it as a journalist. You can comment on it as a journalist. Ordinary people in the street and politicians can comment on it. The last person who is allowed to have an opinion on that is the chief of police. You can take your opinions and keep them to yourself. I know that was a couple of months ago, but I think it just speaks to the fact that the Garda commissioner feels like he can stick his oar in as to who people should be allowed to cast ballots for in this or that election. I think it shows that within the whole official Ireland strata, they really feel like they have a jurisdiction over this that they shouldn't.
Well, I think a lot of this also comes down to that memo from a couple of years back that warned about sort of the breakdown of social cohesion. Clearly sunk in on some level, but it's sunk in. It's like one side of them gets it, and then the other side they're looking in the complete sort of wrong places. Because on the one hand, I think things like this are. What are they afraid of? It's like they're afraid of an alternative voice that'll clearly rile the population against them, which is also why they've obviously had issues with Gript in the past and things like this. Not as to say that, we're attempting to rile anyone. We're literally just reporting on the things other people wouldn't report on, but that's what they're afraid of. But then, so you have that sort of fear, but then they won't look beyond that to the things that are actually causing the breakdown in social cohesion, like the fact that people feel like they're not being listened to. They feel like their communities are being transformed without their consent and things like this. And that's what's generating all of this distrust and frustration in the streets. But they're just like, okay, we're going to ignore that and we're going to focus here on the consequences of that. It's like playing whack-a-mole. It's like they want to hit as many of the consequences of that as they can without solving the underlying issue. And I think, from their perspective, it's a sensible tactic. I mean, could you imagine, I don't know, say again, just use the example that's topical at the moment, McGregor was voted mayor of Dublin, and then he decided to invite Donald Trump on his own initiative to Dublin because obviously they seem to get on well, and to return the favor for inviting him to the White House. Like, an event like that would be an absolute disaster for the government because he would be coming to see McGregor. I mean, however they'd orchestrate things between them, they could snub the government as much as they liked, or anything like this. So again, from the sort of government perspective, it makes good sense, but it does absolutely nothing which to rebalance Irish society or sort of get things back onto an even keel in terms of public temperature, because it doesn't address any of the things that are making people so angry.
And in addition to that, it makes people in general, and me specifically, trust them less when you talk about something like hate speech laws, which are off the table for now, but they are still pushing the misinformation, disinformation, that whole speech control element of it. You and I have spoken off camera, in the past about how we're not radical free speech absolutists in the sense that we can all agree, I think it is reasonable to say that people running around telling malicious lies about politics and policy and saying things that are just blatantly untrue, that they know to be untrue, just purely to muddy the waters and propagandize people, that's a bad thing. That has a
Mm.
corrosive and negative impact on society, and we can all agree with that. So, my problem with the disinformation and misinformation stuff is not per se the idea that people should be allowed to just lie and smear and make up and fabricate stuff with impunity. It's simply the fact that I do not trust the self-appointed arbiters of truth to enforce that in any kind of a reasonable or impartial way. If we were dealing with people who I thought were competent and had fairness and truth and honesty in mind, I would be. I'm not going to say I would support it necessarily. I would still have reservations, but I would be a lot less concerned about
Mm.
those sorts of regulations coming in. I'd think, well, there might be a role for this, or maybe it won't be so bad. But when they do things like this and we hear through the media that they are deliberately arranging the voting system, what kind of elections can and can't be held based on their concerns about who might be
Yeah.
elected. I go, you're the last people I would trust with these sorts of powers.
Yeah, well, it's very much that idea that a lot of what modern politicians are concerned about is preserving the status quo, which is why they sort of operate in terms of these quick fix politics. In terms of like, I think the UK does this just perfectly. It couldn't be any better. Like, every time there's some sort of violent knife crime, it's like, okay, we'll ban this kind of knife, we'll ban this kind of knife,
Ninja sword
and
now.
yeah, ninja swords, and it was like, yeah, last September it was zombie knives and things like this, as though that works. But you get that replicated across the board in the Western world, um, and so yeah, very much the concern is to preserve the status quo, and that impulse. Preserving a status quo isn't necessarily a good thing when the status isn't necessarily a bad thing, I should say, when the status quo is good. And this is the whole problem that we have at the moment, which is that I think a lot of the impulses, funny enough, people are going to disagree with this big time probably, are somewhat good because, like, again, I wouldn't be like, a free speech absolutist in the sense that, to use the classic example, I don't think you should be able to shout fire in a crowded theater and things like that. That's very much more the American free speech, free expression tradition than the European. Whereas in European, there were generally a lot more space for, say, how would you put it? Public order concerns, say, public morality, and all these things. I actually think that was good because, again, people had some common sense before, and when you're dealing with people of goodwill who have common sense, that's generally, in my opinion, not a bad way to get a good society. But the difference is we just have completely different priorities from the people who are in office now. Us, and I would say probably a lot of our readers and supporters, which is that a lot of these people are just concerned with preserving this rotten status quo, rather than fostering the good in society and fostering a society where good ideas can flourish rather than bad ones and things like this. So yeah, it's very much the case that we've set up this system where we're going to ban all challengers to it, and in the meantime, all these toxic fumes are going to keep rising in the midst of what we have. It's just, yeah, and I think this latest thing is just the latest being seen to do something. I suppose banning the mayor's office in Dublin, because they're going to be awfully shocked when this doesn't make any difference in the long run. And I mean, you think about it. 5 years ago, Conor McGregor didn't really have any political voice, and he doesn't have any political office now, but he has a political voice now, and that's because of the discontent that's risen up in the country. I mean, if they think that trend is going to go away because they're not banning, I should say, because it hasn't been implemented yet, but scrapping plans for Dublin mayor's office, they're sorely mistaken.
Well, that, of course, dovetails perfectly with another story that we wanted to cover and get to this week, which is this report from the Irish Mirror, which says Garda sergeants and inspectors are set to call for action on citizen journalists filming officers on duty. And I might just read a little excerpt here to explain a little bit further that middle-ranking Gardaí are set to call for officers to be given protection from civilians filming them as they do their jobs. The annual conference of the Association of Sergeants and Inspectors, which begins in County Kerry today, will debate a motion calling on Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan to address the growing issue of citizen journalists and their impact on policing. And then if we skip ahead a little bit, We hear that members express concern for their family members in particular, where information regarding their name, address, and family details are then published online in the comments accompanying the clip. And effectively, it says that during the Dublin riots and other rioting events, Gardaí were reluctant to express force because they were cognizant of the fact that they were being filmed, and so they didn't want to necessarily, be seen battening some guy, even if it might be justified. Maybe the guy attacked them first, but then people would clip it, only the part where the Garda retaliates, and then that would go online, and suddenly they'd be getting all sorts of backlash in the comments and so on. So what do we think of this, and what do we make of it in the context of the discussion we just had a minute ago?
Well, I do think I did find it very funny that this article, the image on the article is of some Garda batoning someone in Dublin. Given that, as I say, in the article it says they were concerned about the use of force, given that their image might get out there. And I think a lot of our
Yeah.
I think a lot of our listeners would be somewhat shocked to hear that guards have been reluctant to use force, given the images that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. I think the most
tell Fatima that one. That's an ifstar.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, God, what would you have done if the camera wasn't there? Like, but I think we should think back to Dublin in, what was it, 2021, when I think people were really shocked. I would nearly say not eager necessarily, but how quickly and readily the guards ran down. It was South William Street, I think, possibly another one, and batoned all of the people just standing there drinking out of the streets in the name of public order, in the name of public health, I should say. Which again is an example of that. I think sort of the instinct being good back when you had things like, I don't know, Spanish influenza and whatnot stalking the streets rather than COVID. But again,
I could be wrong. I don't even think they did that back then for genuine.
No, they didn't. But I was saying,
during the Black Death, do we have records of people being like beaten in the street with clubs by the law enforcement? I'm not sure that took place. But
you're dead right. But I think people who saw those images and then have seen images since, like Newtown, Mount Kennedy, and all over the place, would be somewhat shocked to hear that there's been a reluctance to use force there. But suffice to say, I do think it's going to be a hard sell, banning sort of citizen journalists and filming Gardaí, because especially now, given that guards are going to be wearing body cams, so you're in a public space, they're filming you, so if needed, that will be there as a resource for the guards to make their case as to why they took the action that they did. And I remember there's previous concerns expressed about the fact that there might be tampering with that footage or the ability to edit it and things like that. So it's whether that's justified or not, it's understandable why people would want to record their interactions with the police in public places. I obviously get what the guard is saying. It's not an easy job. Ireland is a small country. It's easy for your name and your details to get out there and then to face potential harassment. But there is also a little bit of I think there's means to deal with that don't require you banning people from videoing in public. I think that's a really hard sell.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is citizen journalists, and you might people often use that in kind of a sneering, snide way, where even, and I'm not implying that the author of this article, Michael O'Toole, meant it to be insulting, but he has citizen journalists in quotation marks there. I mean, he might just genuinely be quoting them, so I'm not having a go at him specifically, but I think you'll often get people who'll kind of be like, oh, citizen journalist or whatever. If we believe in having a diverse media ecosystem, as we like to hear, what's wrong with ordinary people reporting on things that are happening in their community? Obviously, you can point to examples of citizen journalists behaving badly and shouting abuse at officers who are just trying to do their job. I can find lots of examples of Gardaí behaving badly. I can find lots of examples of mainstream media journalists with press credentials and a badge, and they have the full kit and caboodle, and them behaving badly. So I don't think, as a category, trying to restrict the ability of and we're not even citizen journalists. Like, we're a real media outlet with press council membership, and we're in and out of Leinster House, and so on. So this doesn't even really apply to us. But even
Yeah.
still, I think that ordinary people running around with a camera who want to report on these sorts of volatile situations, I don't know why we would try to ban that as a category unless you are trying to restrict the flow of information, which is, if you wanted to be uncharitable about it, seemingly the goal of some.
Yeah. And I mean, not to make light of any of the like, real downsides to, as I say, some of the situations guards might have found themselves in the past, or that they might, find themselves in future. But there is an overbearing safetyism present. I think I wrote about this a couple of months back. An overbearing safetyism present in Irish society, and you sort of see that again with the sort of shelving the plans for Dublin Mayor, which is just that like we have to limit the opportunities for potentially bad things to happen. And it's like, okay, you can do that, but it's also, can you not see all of the fundamental goods that undermines as well? Like, as I say, I would say, people being able to video their interactions with Gardaí levels the playing field here, in that, Gardaí approach citizens from the position of power. And so this is a way to level the playing field in a sense, and to take that away, I mean, the optics of it are terrible, but it also has loads of terrible, potential ramifications. So, um, I would, with reasonable people, again, I would say this is probably a hard sell, but with the current political cohort, it'd be interesting to see what the Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan says to that, given that he seems to be somewhat more of a common sense ministerial presence than Helen McEntee. But this will certainly be a bit of a test of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that are we saying, or are we of the view that Gardaí have never abused their power before? I mean, I'm not anti Gardaí. Like I would be, like we're politically conservative leaning here. We believe in law and order. We're not anarchist maniacs who think that
Yeah.
defund the police and blah blah blah. Like that's never been us. So clearly, I believe there's a important role that they fulfill for society. I want to see the law enforced, and I respect people who put themselves directly in danger to try and keep society and my family safe. So we all accept that, but it is also very evident and clear that Gardaí, like people in any profession, have abused their power in the past. There are corrupt police. There are police who engage in excessive force and who go beyond the limits of their power. And so to not have the general public as potential, what are the levels of keeping that in check by being able to at least film them and document their behavior? I think it again kind of speaks to an authoritarian streak where we feel like the police can film you, but you can't film them. The police can exert force on you, but you're not able to keep your own private record of what force was inflicted on you and under what circumstances. I think that as an outlet, Gript, that has had the police trying to and possibly succeeding in gaining access to our private correspondence, including as individuals, try to read our DMs using court orders as journalists and expose our sources and so on. Our journalist Fatima has been pepper sprayed in the face by the public order unit after identifying herself as a journalist very clearly and explicitly. Like we've been on the receiving end of this stuff. So forgive me for if I was in an interaction with the police, maybe wanting to have a camera on me and document everything happening just as a common sense precaution. I don't think that that's unreasonable.
No, there's certainly a lot of precedent there for it. And again, in keeping with sort of the tensions we were talking about earlier and the way in which social cohesion is clearly breaking down, this would be a good thing to resist now, because I think it's only going to become more important going forward. Because if we believe that sort of social cohesion is breaking down, that's ultimately going to involve more policing going forward. I don't see any way in which that's not going to be the case. Which means it's going to be important that when there are contentious issues, that you're able to have access to as much information about them as you can. In that sense, it'd be important to have obviously the police body cam footage. This isn't unique to Ireland. They have this in the US. They have this in other places, but also then if you can get access to, say some randomer who was filming the interaction with the police. It seems the more information in situations like this, the better. And I know obviously the Gardaí concerns, as stated in that article in the Irish Mirror, aren't having more information out there, but are apparently, that their face or their name might get out there and there might be ramifications for their family. But unfortunately, I'm certainly not justifying any genuinely ill behavior towards guards or their families, but there is a bit of rough and tumble involved in that line of work. And I would like to think that there's the structures in place for dealing with that, but you can't, take a sledgehammer to what you would say are public freedoms, like filming in public, in order to solve a problem. It's more this, we don't like thinking through problems a lot of the time in Ireland. We just like banning things. It's like this is a thorny problem that requires some delicate thought, but I'm of the opinion that a nuanced solution to it, to put it that way, could be found. But instead they're just like, okay, it might be a good avenue to go. And again, I'm not saying politicians are floating this, because as I say, I think it was rank and file Gardaí, middle ranking Gardaí, that was the article, set to call for officers to be given protection from civilians filming them as they do their jobs. But it's just this censorious streak there that really does far more harm than good.
But can you even imagine the optics of it? Like, let's say this policy came in and they banned citizen journalists filming Gardaí when they're in the middle of a volatile situation. Imagine like there's a riot going on, or there's people who are like, there's a bit of argy-bargy, and there's some guy who's peacefully, passively filming with his phone. He's not doing anything belligerent or illegal.
You're taking a picture of the spire there and just whack the phone out of your hand.
like imagine the visual of a guard barking orders, "Stop filming me, you put your camera away," blah blah blah, and trying to grab the camera out of your hand, and you get arrested, let's say, just for filming them and not doing anything else. Do you think that makes you look good as the officer? Is that going to improve the public perception of the police and the trust that we have with our guardians of the peace? I find it hard to imagine how that's going to make people feel more trusting of the authorities in the state in which we live.
I know, yeah. I think of all the poor Chinese journalists, Chinese tourists wandering around Dublin who are, taking footage of, I don't know, Trinity and things, and they catch a guard in it, and all of a sudden they're subject.
God help you if you try to take a picture of the Molly Malone statue, you'll probably get speared.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's only a matter of time before there's a dedicated Garda unit for the Molly Malone statue, given the columnist calls for such things. But no, the optics of it are potentially terrible. I mean, I do look forward to that potential future when the people start taking footage as protest, because the last thing everyone is getting is the end of a baton flicking at the camera to knock it out of their hands. So, as I said, the optic.
If anybody's ever uploaded a video to YouTube, usually they have like an automated system where they'll suggest a thumbnail for you, and it's just like a random frame from the video, and it tries to interpret what it thinks is the most exciting or action-packed moment in the video. So you it's just a baton right as it's about to hit the camera, like. So yeah, that's
So I think again, this is another one in which I don't think the guards have necessarily thought this. The middle ranking guards who are apparently going to be calling for this, I don't think they fully thought it through. But even if they have, we are a country fond of initiatives lacking sense, maybe, to put it that way. And maybe that'll make a neat segue into the other thing that I suggested we maybe discuss today, because I think it's a genuinely important one, and I saw a stunning lack of coverage of it. So I'll put it this way. I didn't see a lack of coverage of the fact that last week the State Examinations Commission released a bunch of sample examination papers for revised Leaving Cert subjects and 2 new Leaving Cert subjects. So one of the new Leaving Cert subjects is climate action and sustainable development, and according to the department, I should say, that subject is only going to be available in a selection of schools from 2025 to 2026. But I don't think that makes it any less serious, given that it'll be a legitimate state-approved subject, and there'll always be the potential for expanding it there. So I reported last week that I have the article here. Sample exam papers for the new Leaving Cert subject, Climate Action and Sustainable Development, reveal a radical course that will see students addressing questions of environmental racism, climate myths and disinformation, and the role colonialism has played in perpetuating climate injustice. And to give you a couple of examples of some of the things, again, these papers are publicly available. These sample exam papers are publicly available on the State Examination Commission website for those who might like to have a look. And I linked them in the article that I wrote about it at the end of last week. One question on an ordinary level sample paper presents a passage taking aim at the Irish agricultural sector. This passage was from a sort of climate blog / news site called DSmog. That was sort of critical of the Irish farming lobby. And anyway, it takes this passage that's in the sample exam paper takes aim at the Irish agricultural sector as a primary reason for Ireland missing its emission reduction targets, which is some truth to it. It states that an intensive farming lobby appears to be in the driving seat. So the passage undeniably frames sort of the farming lobby as something sort of sinister working against the good, and I don't think that's the place of state exam papers. To use another, and I think far more sinister question on one of the higher level sample papers, there's a question that says the values and worldview of producers of media have a large influence on public attitudes to issues related to climate change and climate justice. And then it goes on to say this is a problem. And then students are asked to discuss this statement, and in their discussion they're encouraged to consider a couple of elements, one of which is the effectiveness of the controls on media to ensure accurate reporting of climate justice issues. I mean, I don't know what I really have to add to that. This speaks for itself. I mean, this is a sample exam paper for a subject that's going to be available in a number of schools in Ireland from September this year. As I say, the reason I segued into this, saying that it got a lot of coverage, but perhaps not the coverage you might like, is because the fact that these exam papers were released was covered, but what was in the papers wasn't touched anywhere. I was quite shocked as I sort of was just having a flick through them all out of curiosity, and when I opened this one, I saw that it was nuts, and I was like, how's no other publication written about this? So hence we did, but suffice to say, climate activism and the climate narrative is well and truly entrenched in Irish schools once that a selection of Irish schools once this subject hits the classrooms.
Yeah, it's really, first of all, none of us, yourself, myself, and probably most of our viewers are climate alarmists. So I'm not really freaking out that the world is going to be destroyed next year by my birthday because cows are farting in County Carlow. Like, that's not anything that we worry about, and I think a lot of it is overhyped lunacy. But even if you wanted to include scientific projections and keep it purely scientific and fact-based, I would object to that. I would contest a lot of the more apocalyptic projections that they have and say I think that that's largely overblown. But you could stomach it to a certain extent and say, well, look, that's the prevailing scientific theory of the day. We can dispute why that is, and we can talk about the various vested interests that are why they would be pushing that. But that's neither here nor there. What is not acceptable is when you are clearly trying to influence children to prescribe a particular policy decision. That has nothing to do with science at all. That is you attempting to influence the media, the agriculture sector. Do not tell me what conclusions my child should come to about politics and what kinds of parties to vote for and what kind of media to allow and disallow and how we should be regulating public discourse. Like, now you are getting into blatant extremist activism, which has absolutely no place in a classroom whatsoever. If you wanted to say climate change is a really serious issue and blah, 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 fine. Again, I don't like it. I'm not keen on it, but we can at least have a conversation about how much of that should be in the school system.
Well, this is
yeah.
I was gonna say no. It's a fair point because this is the difference with this course is that there's a genuinely activistic component. Like, it's not just so there are. I wrote about this as well, that like there are uncontroversial questions about ecology and climate science on there that have been on biology. I did biology at Leaving Cert level. They've been there for years and years now, about like the carbon cycle, about the greenhouse effect, about like, I don't know, a study of a local ecosystem that you had to do. These things have been on biology papers for years. The difference with this paper is there is that it's largely like activistic and advocacy and campaigning centric. I mean, as many sort of ecology questions as there are on it, there's as many sort of political and civil questions on it, and they're not in the usual sort of mold. Maybe there are things like there are all sorts of questions about how best to facilitate a meeting amongst people who, when you're having a climate meeting, amongst different stakeholders who come at it with different views. There are questions like, as I pointed out, consider the effectiveness of controls on media when it comes to discussing climate issues. What this exam paper does is it introduces an entirely inappropriate moral and speculative element to the consideration of all of these things. It's like, whatever, if you want to do that in your own time, I'm going to disagree with you. But this is in a state exam, which is supposed to be teaching, like, education has traditionally been authoritative in countries. Introducing subjects like this undermines the legitimacy of state education. It really does. It makes it gives it an activistic bent. As I say, like, one of the questions is, describe one example of environmental racism that you have studied. Another question on it is
that when you use slurs against trees or something? You've got,
yeah, exactly.
What's a racial epithet for an oak tree? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's
I don't know.
We probably can't say it on air, whatever it is.
Exactly, but too offensive to trees, and calling it. I mean, I hate.
Combustion a man will be on our ass like that.
I have absolutely horrendous hay fever, so I've certainly used plenty of slurs for trees that spread too much pollen and things like this. But a lot of the issue with this as well, and I did a news report on it at the end of last week, and I did a comment on it today, is that, like, it's just importing this ideology that isn't suitable to Ireland. So there's a lot of questions across the exam papers that describe the global north and the global south, which is obviously, the breakdown that's broadly used in a lot of climate lingo, because obviously the global north is seen as being wealthy and having benefited off of the global south in many ways. And the global north obviously is considered to have emitted more. I mean, it has emitted more carbon traditionally, carbon emissions, than the global south and things like this. And so the climate call is for the global north to sort of address that in some way, whether that's by paying climate debt essentially to countries in the global south and things like this. But the issue with this is a state exam paper for Ireland. Ireland is considered, according to the school of thought, to belong to the global north, despite the fact that historically Ireland emitted next to nothing compared to other countries in the global north. Like, if you are going to, think down this track, say, okay, the US emitted a lot, the UK emitted a lot. If you even want to say that, obviously you could contest these things historically, what sort of difference they made to the climate overall. Ireland did not. And then even if you come forward into today, when on sort of a per capita basis, we seem to emit a lot of carbon, it's a drop in the ocean compared to countries in the global south that, this paper is sort of encouraging us to take a stand for. So the whole thing is completely wrong-headed. And I, sitting at home here writing about this, so I didn't have any climate advocates to chat about it with, so I turned to the next best thing and decided to debate ChatGPT, because it sort of comes from a famously woke place on it. And I was sort of like pushing this. I was saying, like, how is it fair for Ireland to be considered part of the global north that essentially has to make reparations to the global south, when you factor in that it historically didn't really emit anything, and even today emits far less than countries in the global south that have to be made amends to. And it essentially got backed into a corner, and it was like, yeah, there are nuances to this model, and this is why experts say that it's not like a black and white thing. And yet you have this model in this state exam paper. So it's really one that, as I said, it's not suitable for the Leaving Cert. Like, if this is your passion project, I'm going to disagree with you on that. But this should not be in schools being taught as a subject alongside maths and physics and classics and English. It's of a different. You can't even say it's like CSPE. It's much more speculative and moralistic than that.
You know how you know all of this is a scam, and I don't by all of this I don't mean like climate change itself. I more just mean the policy prescription for it. You know it's a scam because their answer to every problem is the exact
Mm-hmm.
same chain of policies, just slightly reconfigured. That COVID breaks out, they go, "Oh, you have to give the government more money and power, and we need to, expand globalization. You need to
Mm-hmm.
cede national sovereignty to the European Union and the World Health Organization, and we need to come up with some sort of uh, you know, more global governance, basically."
Yeah.
And then climate change, they say the exact same thing. You got to give up more money and power to the government. The government has to regulate media and so on. And we have to come up with these international climate frameworks and COP, and the UN has to get involved. And immigration, every single thing that happens, if World War III breaks out tomorrow, it'll be the same answer again. And again, it kind of just goes to show you that the answer is never about the issue itself. There's no kind
Mm-hmm.
of there's no event that's going to happen on Earth where they're not going to basically say, yeah, we have to tax you more and we have to seize more of your ability to speak and to do what you want, move freely, be it through
No.
COVID lockdown or making it so that you can't afford to fly away on your holidays and you have to stay at home. Like they'll do what they want to do by hook or by crook, and really it's just a matter of finding a suitable excuse at any given moment.
Yeah. Well, that's the very point I made, and I think the comment today, which was that, like, as I say, a lot of the sort of scientific questions on this are, rehashes of things that have been on biology papers for a long time when it came to climate. But what this brings in is questions about sort of social, cultural, political measures you might take to bring about changes now. And yeah,
Well,
as a
like,
result,
sorry to interrupt you, but what do you think the odds are if you're a kid in school and you're doing this exam and they say what do you think? Just that I'm going to make up a question. I don't know that this question is on the exam, but something to the
mm,
effect of uh, to what extent do you think the agriculture industry has an impact on climate change? What if you say none at all? I don't think it has any impact whatsoever, and here's why. And you make an argument, and you're talking about how in the scheme of things, Ireland's contribution is minuscule and blah blah blah, and you back it up with reasonable arguments and facts and figures.
yeah,
Is that kid going to pass or is he going to fail miserably? Even though he answered the question, he gave a relevant answer that was well argued and so on and so forth. Or is he going to be given a big fat F because he didn't answer the right way? Because we know they're asking for a specific answer, which is that you consume and digest the propaganda that we've rammed up your ass sideways. Like that's
no, and I
really what's
mean,
going on here.
there's clear evidence of that sort of subjective element when it comes to the marking of things. Because I mean, there's one question, I just try to find it here, and I really would encourage people to look up these sample papers because it sounds, a lot of it sounds sort of hyperbolic, and it's like, oh, just people who don't want to talk about this. But then you look at the papers, and the questions are just, stupidly subjective in some cases. Like one of the questions on the higher level sample paper too is, which three of the following demands are best aligned with a global campaign for climate justice? And there's five options to choose from. Um, like, according to which metric are they deciding which are the best calls aligning with a global campaign for climate justice? It's like, this isn't like maths where 2 + 2 = 4. This is, you know, someone somewhere has decided speculatively that these three things are the best ones that align with a global campaign for climate justice. Because, okay, say if the options were absolutely mad, then you might say, well, these ones are obviously off. The one that is obviously off to me, if I'm thinking with their mind, is one of the demands is loans to be repaid with interest provided by richer countries to the countries worst impacted by climate change. I imagine they don't want to hear that one, because who wants to hear repaid with interest? And then I imagine the other one that they don't like is equal reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by all countries. Um, But like at the same time, like the other three options they have are like a key role for, and I presume these are the ones that they wanted to hear, a key role for indigenous communities in making climate change decisions at United Nations conferences. It's like, why don't we in Ireland count as an indigenous community, given that, we've been here forever? Why can't we make our own sort of why can't we be making sort of the major climate change? I mean, I know people would say, oh, you're invited to conferences and things like this, but if we're going to sort of esteem certain groups of people when it comes to this, it seems we should probably fit into that esteemed category. But that's not what's happening. This exam paper very much lumps us in with those committing the ecological sins who have a debt to pay. So I was really shocked reading this to see that this is one of the sample exam papers, and certainly if I had kids in secondary school, I would be like saying you should not be. I mean, I wouldn't tell them not to do it because I'm not. I don't think that's ever going to work. But I would be saying like you should really consider whether this is a subject you want to do.
It's probably you could go either way with it. Where on one hand you could say to your kids here, you should probably avoid that, or you could say this is the easiest points you're ever going to get because if you regurgitate absolute swill, you don't have to believe a word of it. You just tell them what they want to hear. They will lap it up because it's really just a social engineering project. You don't even have to study. You know what they want you to say, and you'll just it's basically a heist of points. You can just go in there into the exam hall with a ski mask on and walk out sorted for whatever degree you actually want to do. So yeah,
because it is like utterly predictable stuff. One of the questions on the ordinary level paper was something about I have it here as well. I have them all in front of me. Examine the chart and the figure 5 below, showing how lifestyle choices can reduce carbon emissions, and answer the questions that follow. And it's like, which lifestyle choices reduce carbon emissions the most? But it's like, it's all of the things we've always heard. The most reductive choice is living car free. After that, it's avoiding flying. After that, it's avoiding meat, avoiding red meat. So it's like, you spend enough time on X or any other social media with political dialogue taking place, you'd be able to sort of cruise through this exam. But it's as I say, should not be a state exam is my brief synopsis of it.
Yeah, and I also think that in addition to it being very clearly propaganda aimed at children, I did a video a while back where I cut together a super compilation of different politicians calling for the voting age in Ireland to be lowered to 16, and pretty much all parties in the Oireachtas have said that they want to do this, although none of them have actually gone ahead with it for reasons best known to themselves. Well, it's weird. You get these policies that have total unanimous cross-party support, and no one does it, which I don't quite get. In this case, I'm very glad, by the way, because it's a horrible idea and it should never happen. But, for reasons they say it's a good idea, they all want to do it and they don't do it. So I guess we should be thankful.
That one just fell down the back of the couch.
Yeah, exactly. So with that said, one of the main arguments when you listen to them saying we should allow 16-year-olds to vote is because so many of them will explicitly, openly say, well, young people are much more concerned about the climate crisis and they know it's their future and blah, blah, blah. So kind of coming back to this, almost like the earlier story we were talking about, they are deliberately trying to introduce a new electorate who they know are more interested in a certain issue so that they can manufacture a certain result. Also, the significance of that is they're aware that young people no less than older people definitionally on average. That is not even an insult to young people. It's just an absolute fact that if you've been alive for 16 years and someone else has been alive for 60 years, the 60-year-old probably has more life experience and wisdom than you, because wisdom is acquired over time. So that's just blatantly factually true. And so you are deliberately if you wanted to be really harsh in your language, you could say manipulating or grooming young people into holding a certain view because you know that it would be harder to sell older people on that view. Like, we just had a general election late last year, a couple of months ago, where the Green Party was decimated. It now consists of one guy with glasses. That's the remainder of the entire Green Party and their representation in the Dáil. So that's how the general public, as far as the voting public, feels about this party that has made the climate issue their raison d'etre. And that is such a problem for the powers that be within the education department and within the NCCA and so on, that they now want to try and get their hooks, get their tendrils into the youth of the country, propagandize the hell out of them, so that when they become 18 and they can vote, hopefully we can see a revival, either in the form of the Green Party or some other party that has similar views. And they would like to lower the voting age even younger, so that you have transition year students deciding the fate of the country because they'll believe anything you tell them. So, I think we've kind of unveiled a trend in this episode with all the stories we covered, as far as, deliberately banning elections or doing away with plans for a certain election because you're scared of who might get elected. Not allowing the general public to film the police in their duties in case, it has a negative impact on the police, and damn the civil rights consequences. And then injecting blatant partisan propaganda into the school system and making it an official state exam that you push the state line. So I don't know what kind of North Korea levels of statecraft we're going for here, but they're clearly outdoing themselves in that regard.
I know there are some weeks that, like, you read the news, and last week was one of them where I was looking at this, and it's like, people always laugh at, say, the North Korea example, because obviously I'm not saying, and it's understandable in some North Korea. That's the reason we all draw the parallel with North Korea, because it's this insanely unique and unorthodox happening over there. But sort of the principles of state control and things like that, Ireland is running a pretty good soft totalitarianism, to put it that way. I think, the sort of the way in which a lot of these horrendous things are injected into the mainstream, and somehow they're just kind of accepted and given a free pass, is incredibly harmful to the fabric of public life. And as you say, the things we discussed this week, I think, are prime examples of that. So here's hoping, anyway, a few more people will be informed of them after their Tuesday podcast.
Yeah, it's this is the totalitarian episode. Maybe that's a good name for this week. I don't know. You're better at the names than I am.
No, I can't come up with anything on the spot, but there'll be some grim title anyway. I don't know. I feel beaten down after the past week of news.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, hopefully not too beaten down that people won't tune in next Monday, which, as I said at the big outset, will be our new podcast dropping day. So we look forward to seeing you all next week, and we will talk to you soon. God bless.
God bless.